It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I'm just glad to be here. Thank you to Rachel. Thank you to Jason, of course, for inviting me to be a part of this. It's a pleasure to join with the team at EdTech and all of those who are assisting. And thank you again, Rachel, for making this easy on us, and pleasure to join not just with you, but also our next presenter, Anne Marie. So I'm excited about this opportunity to share with you all some information and some maybe some revelation, hopefully a little bit, and I'll see if it will let me change my screen. There we go. About what it is to use this formative assessment and see time data. Jason talked a little bit about formative and summative. I'm going to talk just about formative today, and the ability to use that information in order to hopefully provide resources to increase retention and student success rate. And we're going to talk about that and break it down a little bit. Of course, when you start talking data, it can take you hours to talk about the data. We're not going to take hours. We have the time allotted today, so we're going to share based on that time that we have, and hopefully in the breakout session, we can share more. And if folks have questions about other things and maybe some concepts we're using, and we share, we can talk about those in the breakout. But for now, let's just jump into this. At the moment, I want to look at this quote just briefly, and I'm kind of a Malcolm Gladwell reader buff. He says, how you feel about your abilities, your academic self-concept in the context of your classroom shapes your willingness to tackle challenges and finish difficult tasks. It's crucial. It's a crucial element in your motivation and confidence. So when we're getting into this data and when we're talking about this information, looking at formative information, looking at all the assessments that teachers use so often and have to look at, I want to just remind us that it's important how the student sees themselves in the classroom. How the student feels about themselves, what they feel about themselves in the classroom makes a huge difference when we start talking about looking at test data, looking at information and feedback that we get from testing sources. And we do a lot of testing. As school and academics have progressed, testing has become such a major part of what we do. And I want to kind of take some of the pain out of how we look at testing and some of the struggle and help us to realize that it can really be an opportunity to really help the students to succeed, and not just help students to succeed, but help teachers to also feel that they are empowered to help students succeed. So the way I want to look at this is really looking at it from this continuum. And you can take it from any part of this continuum. At this point, I want to look at it just from earned hours. When we think about earned hours, and that's what formative assessment and really seat time data looks at, the earned hours, the hours a student spends in the classroom. We go from earned hours to testing to personalized instruction. And I'm going to kind of break that down in these few minutes that I have. Many times we start, and it is a part of our system that we start with the testing. We start with testing, which helps the teachers and helps us to be able to place the students in a position where they know what's next for them. If we start with testing, for instance, TABE, Jason mentioned TABE testing. We use TABE testing. That's the first place that our students find themselves, testing in TABE. which gives us instant feedback as to where the student is. Even before the student earns hours, we want to see what that student already knows, how we can help that student, how we can empower that student. So as we work through this, we look at earned hours, we look at the time the student is going to be in the classroom. We hold that in a block. For us, it is earned hours equals 40 hours. Test, test, earn 40 hours, test again. At that point, we can also look at how we can better personalize instruction. So with those three areas, we keep in mind earned hours, testing, personalized instruction. Or you can look at it from the testing side first: testing, personalized instruction, and earning hours. All of this helps us to be able to understand formative assessment, which is a wide variety of methods that teachers use to conduct in-process evaluations. We test all of the time. And one of the things I want to talk about, even as we get towards the end of my lightning talk, is the fact of teaching to test versus teaching based on what the needs of the students are. So many times you hear negatives about teaching to test. Are we just teaching to test? Well, I want to kind of break that down, how that works, because we're not just teaching based on a test, but teachers conduct in-process evaluations all of the time for students in order to understand what they are comprehending. That's what we do at the beginning of receiving a student in our adult education program. Kind of a little bit about what I do in that is we do adult education. I teach an adult education. I tell my students all the time, I teach adult ed because I want to teach adult ed. It is on purpose. I love working with those who, thank you, yes, I love working with those who are adults, who many times are there because they want to be there. But when we test these adults, when we look at their assessments, we're getting to the place where we want to find out what their learning needs are, what our process is going to be for helping these students to attain the goals that they have set for themselves. In our case, many times it's a GED. It's completing a GED. It's continuing, being able to get into a continuing ed situation where they can go into curriculum. So we look at this, we look at the lesson, we look at the units, we look at the courses from the place of the assessment. Some examples, and I'm going to try to just slow down a little bit and look at a couple of examples we have here. When we look at these examples, and I know you may look at it and say, oh, I just see a bunch of words and a bunch of numbers. But what it is for many of us, many times, is a snapshot as to where the student is and how we can better serve the student. Our job is to serve the students. And when we look at this TABE assessment, this is a TABE assessment you have on the left-hand side. The TABE assessment allows us to look at the student, and if you look at the bottom of it, you can see where the student has non-proficiencies or partial proficiency or have gained proficiency in a certain area. When we as instructors look at this, I find this empowering, and a lot of our teachers find this empowering, because if we have 20 students in the classroom, we can look at all of their TABE assessments, and if 15 of the 20 have non-proficiency in these three areas, this really helps us to understand where our teaching strategies need to be headed. We look at the partial proficiencies, and if a lot of those students have partial proficiencies in these areas, it really informs our lesson. It helps us to know where our students are having trouble, so that we don't do, as many times we do, start teaching from a place that we have yet to assess where our students are. And many times we've done that in the past. We just start teaching based on the test or based on a curriculum and have yet to look at our students. What I look at when I see this is contextualization. When we look at where our students are, we can then contextualize what our lessons need to be. For many of us, we teach and we are trained to teach and now present lessons based on contextualization, meaning we want our students to kind of see the world. We don't want them to just see the lesson. How do they see themselves in the lesson? How are they able to make sense of their world based on the lessons? Well, teachers can do that when we contextualize our lessons, when we contextualize our information, when we look at assessments and are able to understand where students are. On the right-hand side, you see NRS instructor report card. That doesn't just give me information about the students, that lets me know how many hours the students have been in the seat, because when we think of seat time data, it's really thinking about bodies in the seats. How long have you had bodies in the seats? But it's not just about bodies in the seats, it's about, are the bodies in the seats getting the information that they need in order to be successful? So looking at data helps us to be able to be informed instructors or teachers. The next one I want to look at is just a breakdown of seat time data, because you heard me say that it refers to the use of academic credits and success based on hours the students sat in the classroom. Sometimes this can be looked at negatively, because in many cases, it was seen as we're just saying if a student sits in a classroom the whole 40 hours, they should get it. Well, the thing about that is you can't look at just the amount of time the student sat in the classroom. You have to look at it from a sense of, am I understanding this information? Am I understanding who this student is? Am I being contextualized when it comes to this student with the information I'm gaining from this student? Is this helping me to contextualize who they are? Because you can have a student sitting in the seat for 40 hours and feel like the student is comprehending, and then when they go to test, you realize maybe they haven't. Or you can have a student that's not in the seat and you're wondering what's happening with this student, or you can make assumptions about this student. Especially in adult education, it's very negative when you try to make assumptions based on where you think a student is and you don't have proper information. For example, the other day we kept doing tape requirement of a student that was not there, and people kept asking, well, where's this student? Does the student not want to complete this program? Does the student not want to get this information? Does the student not want to be successful? And I had to say, wait a minute, slow down, because this student really has more happening than you realize. That particular student was dealing with a situation where him and his mom are homeless. They're looking for housing. They were struggling with housing. So many times we make assumptions about either the seat time or the lack of it. And we many times make assumptions and don't realize that we need to have this in a contextualized picture, because we assume things that may not be true. So that's what we think about when we think about seat time and formative assessment. As we start to wrap, one of the formative assessments we look at, Jason had a snapshot of this on his screen. We use essential education to try to understand and follow a student and understand where a student is. Essential education provides the student with a marvelous, and I'm not paid to say this, but it provides the student with a marvelous way to look at where they are and where they want to be. Where they are, where they want to be. I tell a student that is in my online class, which I teach online and face to face. I have them to look at this. I said, this is where you are. This is where you want to be. Where you are is E. Where you want to be is A. Once you arrive at A, I tell them, you can get excited because once you arrive at A, you are at the place where we need to start looking at you practice testing for what? For the GED. So that moves us to the next level. It moves us to where student is getting ready for their GED. We provide practice test assessments for the GED so a student can practice test and see where they are in order to know what they need to do in order to move forward in reaching their goal. I know I'm running out of time and I'm running to this last screen that's going to get us done. When we look at the information, and I mentioned this earlier, and I can talk about this more in the breakout. We don't teach to test, but like many of you in school systems, you do have content standards. So we do, even though we don't teach to test, we do teach based on content standards. The test becomes then our feedback, and the feedback allows us to provide focused instruction. So we use our content standards because we have them. Then we test. The testing gives us feedback. The feedback then allows us to provide focused instruction. When I say content standards for us, it is the NC, the North Carolina content standards. We look at those content standards from the NC community colleges. And so this helps us to move forward and to help students to realize their goals.